All aboard, everybody. Sessions are starting. That really sounds cool over the PA at a train station.
Yeah, it's 4 o'clock. It's getting dark. Yeah, let's go. We got the microphone working there too.
I don't need a mic. My name's Kevin Griffin. I'm the Director of Maintenance for UDOT. I am the moderator for the session today. Appreciate you coming. Today we have Lisa Burgess with us from Kimley Horn. She has been part of an I-15 dynamic mobility study with our I-15 coalition. I'm actually on the I-80 coalition, and we kind of work together a little bit. I'm going to let her really explain what this is all about, but this is really an important aspect of the future of UDOT. And you remember Carlos yesterday in his presentation talking about mobility. It's a huge issue with UDOT. And so this is just one of those main emphasis areas where we're looking at our I-15 corridor across a few states and how we address mobility through this whole corridor and things we can do to improve that, not only now but for the future. So I'll turn the time over and it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Good. Whoops.
Couple of housekeeping. Phones on silent. Everybody, please.
All right. Good morning. All right. Thank you all for coming today. I know 8 o'clock is a tough session. It's still pretty dark and chilly outside. But we've got some cool information to share with you about some innovative things happening with I-15 in terms of long-range planning, as well as some short-term innovative technology applications. I first want to acknowledge Glenn Blackwelder, who's here, and he's a key part of that Traffic Operations Center for UDOT, has also been very, very active with this dynamic mobility project on I-15, as well as the sort of related project on I-80. Lisa Miller also very active with that. She has provided really good information in terms of some of the traveler information. What can we do better? How can we share information among states better? So thank you both, and I'm both glad you're here today. So before I get started, I just want to have Dan share a few insights. Dan Kuhn has been a big part of the I-15 group as well as the I-80 group. So I know he brings some really unique perspective to this project. So Dan.
Well, I'm glad we've got a few more people here than we did 10 minutes ago. It was pretty empty. A couple of things about I-15. I'm the railroad and freight planner for UDOT. And so I spend most of my time looking at things that go on outside of Utah rather than inside Utah. Freight doesn't care where the state boundaries are. And so a freight mobility problem in California has a direct effect on businesses and freight movement here in Utah. Now, we in Utah generally think of I-15 as a north-south highway. The freight industry does not. When you look at I-15 in the context of the western interstate system and the primary freight network highways in the western U.S., I-15 in reality is the Southern California connector to I-80. I-80 is one of our main east-west freight routes, like I-40 down south, and fully 2/3 to 3/4 of all long-distance truck traffic on I-15 south of Salt Lake City is east-west in nature. It is not north-south. Interplan planning, Vern Kiesler is sitting right there in the striped shirt. We did a study for Federal Highways about truck parking along I-15 over the last, almost 5 years now. And we interviewed 435 truck drivers at truck stops along I-15. They were from, 43 states and like 5 Canadian provinces. And the furthest one was from Key West, Florida, and from Quebec City, Ontario, in Quebec, Canada. So when you think of I-15, it links northern and southern Utah, but it is a major part of east-west commerce across North America. And so keep that in mind as we look at I-15. We think of it more as a regional road. It is very much an important and strategic part of our national highway system for freight. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I am actually doing double duty today. The I-15 Mobility Alliance really comprised of a couple of different project teams. So one of them you may be familiar with, the overall Mobility Alliance. That consultant is CH2M. And they work with a lot of the, mostly the planners, taking a little bit longer term look at what are some of those key needs on the I-15 corridor. And then I represent the Dynamic Mobility Project. But neither of the CH2M folks that have been involved were able to attend today, so they were gracious enough to provide me with a little bit of info that I can share here. So back in 2007, Nevada DOT, Utah DOT, Caltrans, and Arizona DOT collectively got together to establish the Mobility Alliance to take a look at I-15 from a multi-state perspective and really begin to start initiating some longer-term planning activities, some coordinated planning activities, helping to identify some of those key priorities for that corridor. So this alliance includes a lot of different representatives from various agencies through the 4 different states. State DOTs, MPOs have been pretty actively involved. We've got cities and counties, and a lot too on private industry from the freight standpoint, freight stakeholders, as well as some different nonprofit organizations. So they've all been kind of working together to develop a long-term strategy for how to incrementally improve I-15, both infrastructure as well as mobility. So some of the key accomplishments of this group, I think probably some of the most significant is to be able to collectively support some of the Tiger Grant applications of the last few years. I know we're still waiting for the one here in Utah, but the I-15 bridge construction there with Arizona. Arizona's got such a small piece of I-15. Usually you have to come into Utah to access it. But I know with that bridge replacement, a lot of those work zones makes it very challenging getting in and out of Utah on that corridor. The master plan that they developed back in 2012 looked at a lot of different project improvements. One of the ones that came out of that master plan was a need to, a very short-term need to really start to improve the communication and the coordination among the states there along that I-15 corridor. That led to a grant application that this group prepared that resulted in the Dynamic Mobility Project I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So this group now, I guess how many in this room have been part of the I-15 Alliance discussions? Dan, Lisa, Vern, so a few of you here, so you're somewhat familiar. So they're looking at sort of an update to that master plan that was developed back in 2012. They're looking too at developing a more detailed economic analysis on a corridor-wide level. And another thing they're really looking to move forward with is performance measures. This is one of those things where the Mobility Alliance and the Dynamic Mobility Project are going to be coordinating on. A couple of other initiatives. Dan had mentioned looking at the truck parking. So this group is going to be taking a corridor-wide look at some of the truck parking as well as the emergency detour planning. All right, so I mentioned that the grant application that this group put together resulted in the Dynamic Mobility Project. So the Alliance applied for that. Nevada DOT is actually the lead administrative agency, but Utah is a very key partner. Caltrans also a very key partner. And then Arizona, even though they've got a small stretch and their operations center is very far away from this corridor, they're also involved in some of these discussions as well. So the I-80 corridor, that group is largely focused on winter operations. Mobility during adverse weather involves a lot of the same partners. They were also a recipient of one of these multi-state corridor operations and management grant programs. We've got some common stakeholders between those two corridors, so it makes a lot of sense for those two groups to be coordinating. So this map here illustrates the operating environment here for I-15. We've got a lot of different UDOT offices along this corridor. We've got several different operations centers. We've also got a few different Caltrans districts that are involved. So each one of these agencies has their own systems, they've got their own operations centers. So just coordinating among all of those is going to be a really important focus of this mobility project. This group is not so much focused on improving the day-to-day travel, typical travel, no major impacts. It's really wanting to get a way to address when major events happen on this corridor. So we've got a few examples here on some of the different major closures that have caused some pretty extensive and long-term delays. Whether it's winter weather, whether it's holiday travel weekend, agencies need to be able to coordinate better, share information, be able to access updated information in order to make a lot of those operational decisions. So this was probably one of the most recent events that impacted the corridor that had quite a ripple effect to some of the other states. The big fire happened in Southern California. Luckily, there was no road infrastructure damage, so this closure really only lasted about a day, right? So our goals here, really improve how states can coordinate and manage some of those big events that happen on I-15 and be able to do that in real time. Both operations and management, as well as obtain data, get real-time data, get access to partner states' data, right? So number one. Number two, we really want to develop a solution that can support those I-15 agencies to be able to collectively operate and manage that corridor. Each one of the partner states, they've made their own investments in their systems. They're not looking to disrupt any of their system activities. So whatever the solution is, it really needs to be compatible with and work with some of the existing agency systems. Another key goal was to make corridor-wide information available to travelers. We had a very interesting meeting back in March where a lot of the states that there was not a lot of support for creating a new traveler information system. A lot of states had made very key investments in 511, in mobile applications, so there was not a lot of interest in wanting to market and support another system. However, there is recognition that we need to do a better job about getting consistent information out to travelers, and in particular, freight. So we're not taking the public website necessarily off the table. We might be repurposing it a little bit, and we're going to be talking to some stakeholders as we go through the process. So then another key goal, of course, was to coordinate with the I-80 Winter Operations Coalition. We have a lot of common stakeholders. We have some very common issues. So there was just going to be a lot of good synergy there. Our key stakeholders are primarily traffic management centers, traffic operations centers. There's a lot of other partners and other stakeholders that obviously do have a role in here, but we know that that operations center is sort of the focal point of where those information exchanges happen. So also operations and maintenance, public information, planning, as well as including the freight planners. We know that there's a lot of different groups here in UDOT, as well as along the corridor, that are really going to benefit from improved information sharing and coordination. A couple of key industries, we've talked about freight. Tourism is another one. If you talk to the partners in Las Vegas, tourism, economic development, that's at the top of their list. So we know that there's a lot of other industries that are going to be involved and could benefit. So we've completed the first phase, and we call it MCOM, Multi-State Corridor Operations and Management. We've completed the first phase where we walked through a very systematic process looking at what's currently out there on the corridor. What kind of devices do agencies currently operate? Where are there some gaps in communications? We dived in also on some very topic-specific webinars, looking specifically at weather, at emergency management. So some of those dimensions of different events that happen, just to kind of get a sense of how do information needs change? How do those operational needs change? We also had a very focused in-person meeting back in the spring to walk through some potential concepts. We use that term solution because we really don't know what this system is yet. Is it a website? Is it an application? Is it software that needs to be installed? We don't know. We don't know. So you'll see that we use that term solution a lot. So we had an in-person meeting to walk through some different concepts for how could this data be obtained, how could this data be shared. I'm going to walk through a few of those a little bit later on in the presentation. But ultimately, we did arrive at a preferred operational concept, and we're actually going to be going through and starting the development of that here very shortly. We had one of the topic-specific webinars we had was on weather. We've got some very different weather issues along the I-15 corridor. Obviously, here in Utah, winter, that corridor is very prone to snow, ice, those kind of hazardous winter weather conditions. You also look at Southern California. They're not really that prepared when winter hits on I-15. If you look at in Nevada, you have the risk of blowing dust and some of those kind of weather impacts. So we wanted to kind of get a handle on what do those look like for different agencies along I-15. So some of the other topics we include, what are the different sources agencies use? Everybody has a different way of obtaining some of that weather information. Utah here is the only one that's got an on-site meteorologist at the operations center to be able to inform operations in real time. Big topic here on weather was the Moapa flooding event, where weather quickly turned into an emergency management situation. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So the other topic-specific webinar that we did was on how do you really handle some of those planned closures. We talked about some of the work zones and some of the planned event processes. And what we found was that even information on planned events was somewhat inconsistent and wasn't actually shared with the people that it needed to be shared with. So we found a lot of opportunities to improve some of those processes in the very near term. So some of the gaps and needs. As we go through this process and we look to develop up a solution that all 4 states can actually use to their benefit, we really wanted to look at where are some of the gaps, where are some of those challenges, where are some of those key needs. So we arrived with several different categories. I've just got a very brief summary here. Data collection and sharing. A lot of agencies collect their own data. Some may share with other groups within their state, but there was a real need to improve sharing it across all agencies, as well as identifying just points of contact at some of the partner states, so that someone in California would know who to contact at the UDOT Traffic Operations Center. So that was one we were able to address pretty quickly. On the field infrastructure side, you look at the urban areas, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, San Diego. they're pretty well instrumented. So agencies have eyes and ears to be able to see what's happening relative to some of the traffic conditions, incidents, et cetera. A lot of the rural areas, there's a lot of portions of this corridor that are considered rural, is a data gap. There's not any detection, there's not any cameras, communications can be challenging. So we know that within those rural areas, we've got a gap to address in terms of how do we get some of that real-time information. Coordinating systems across state lines, really difficult when each agency has their own system. None of them are talking to each other. The systems are not talking to each other yet. The ability to interface with multiple different systems to manage ITS infrastructure, also a challenge. There were also varying levels of data, weather monitoring. Each agency kind of handled it a little bit differently. Obviously, weather is a very high priority here for Utah, so there have been some very significant investments in getting that information and in sharing it. Each state also operates their own traveler information system. So there are multiple different ways where people can go to be able to find out that information of what's happening on the I-15 corridor. But there was not a lot of coordination between some of those. Communicating with freight. Dynamic message signs, great way to be able to communicate with travelers while they're already en route, but we identified a very important gap that we need to be able to get this information to freight ahead of time. How do we get to not only the drivers, but also the dispatch centers? And then freight parking, truck parking, of course, and also the detouring and rerouting. When there is a major event and a long-term closure, there are different approaches in each state to establishing some of those alternate routes. So we know that that's a challenge that we'll look to address. How many of you are familiar with this graphic? A few? This is what's called the systems engineering process, the V, right? And this is actually the process that we're using to try to develop this solution for agencies on the corridor. We know there's going to be some data exchanges. We know there's going to be multiple agencies needing to access information. And we're following a very systematic process here that is quite common in software development. Where we are right now is at the very top of the left-hand side. We've got the concept of operations. We've done some of the feasibility work. Our next steps are going to be working down the V to develop the system requirements, to do some of the high-level design, start doing some of the beta design, and then the implementation goes all the way up the other side. So based on what we had accomplished there in phase 1, there were really 5 initial operating goals that were going to guide that whole V process, okay? First one, help to elevate corridor situational awareness. Make sure Utah is aware of something happening in Las Vegas that could affect traffic coming to or from Utah. Make sure Caltrans knows if there's a closure on the Arizona section of I-15 so that they can make appropriate recommendations for rerouting. Elevate that corridor situational awareness. Second, promote more proactive and coordinated responses. Okay? Number 3, the system, the solution needs to be compatible with current agency systems. No, the partner agencies are not going to replace what they currently have. They don't want to modify what they currently have. This has got to work with and complement each of those systems there from the 4 states. It needs to support consistent and reliable information to multi-state travelers. I know even with the Moapa closure, there was conflicting information coming from different states. One state said it was open, the other one said it was still closed. How do we make that information more consistent, accurate, and reliable? And number 5, this really needs to demonstrate the value of improved coordination as a result of the project, right? It's going to be really challenging to measure from incident to incident. Has this been able to improve how we do things? Because they're all so different. But we need to find a way to make sure that we can show that there is value in this investment in doing this. So this is where we get to the fun activity part, right? We developed some different operational concepts, and we looked at a lot of different scenarios with that group meeting that we had back in the spring. We knew that we wanted a way to be able to link up agencies along the corridor, share information in a way that's meaningful and very relevant, right? Enhance current operations, expand information sharing to other partners, and improve information for travelers. So these were kind of the foundation of a lot of the operational scenarios that we worked through. So one of the operational scenarios that came up, because it was largely still fresh in a lot of people's minds, was the flooding and the infrastructure washout that happened there in Moapa, Nevada, September, a little over a year ago. What I would like this group to do is break into 3 different groups, and you get to be the Traffic Operations Center. Right? You get to be the team at the UDOT TOC. So if an event like this happens where there's this record flooding, I-15 in both directions damaged, it's not reopening in the next day or so, how are you going to handle that? Okay? So even though this closure is 2 states away, you still got to get through Arizona and there into Nevada, but flooding has damaged it. It's 2 states away. You know this is going to really impact traffic, particularly long-haul traffic. So I've got a handout here to help, okay? I would like you to break into 3 groups, and you get to strategize on how to best handle that event. So my handout here, and I'll leave this up, start to think about what kind of information would you need immediately if something like that happened? Who would you need to notify? And think beyond your immediate partners here in Utah. Given that it's a very long-term closure, this is not something that's going to be open in the next day, next 2 days, how does some of the information change? Or how do your information needs change over time? Since it extends well over a week. And then what kind of tools would you need? What kind of tools would you need to help improve how you're going to respond to that? We have a few ringers in the crowd. So Lisa, Glenn, and also Rob, also obviously very active here with a lot of that, not only day-to-day, but big emergency management. So I don't want the 3 of you in one group. I'd like you to fan out into 3 different groups, okay? I've got some handouts, and I'm going to give you what I'd like. We're going to take about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I'd like each group to have somebody to report back, and we're going to take the feedback we get today as part and start incorporating it into the requirements process. Okay, and I'll show you how we're going to use that when we're done with this. So just make sure each group has a couple. I only have a few of them. So each group has a couple, yeah. So you can break into groups here. I don't know if there's a space out in the big open area back here that might work.
And the renewal is basically the same way, but on the appeal to begin with, you're going to submit the same documentation. What we're looking for is we're looking for updated NSDS, technical and testing. If there's required testing on that product, we're looking for updated testing results out of the lab, stating that you've gone through and had been tested. Supplier work, manufacturers and new product, we talked about that. The new product has been accepted for inpatient, limited to the stated and accepted care. At this point, the product is in the appeal until 4 years. If the product is in the appeal and there have been no changes to the product within 4 years, it will stay on there. It will get change the formulation or the manufacturing. We require that you notify us, because that's a reason to take it off. They're looking at changes to the manufacturer's MSCS, changes to the installation process, any of those things we require you to notify us to make sure that you still have the appropriate information. Those installation and technical data, this is pointed out with the plan, is critical to the people. What happens after many years, after the full acceptance period, the product is implemented on the application. Has not been reviewed and the new process is the same as the initial application for the evaluation. Manufacturer supplier is expected to furnish updated documentation and testing rules regarding the application. Manufacturer supplier provides exact verification results. It is suggested manufacturer supplier get started on the renewal process and expire in the application. That way the product never comes off the shelf. If you upload it prior to that expiration date, it will give you a new date and it just continues. Otherwise, it can be the APO was designed to accommodate some of the product needs when you've got construction projects and the maintenance of the road system. APO is not all inclusive. It does not cover all the products. It's not what we do is we started off with a really small facility that we have out there, and we expect those compliant form. In order to populate this, you're going to include the zero, and include the sheet, include the PIN number of the project. Most of the time, we go by PIN number or CFA. Once it's processed, and information, you go into item, and it's drawn up individual items from that project. So now you can go in and you can search for the item that goes with each item.
All right, we've got about another 5 minutes. And that tells you what documentation needs to be shipped with that All right, we're gonna look to wrap up and get some presentations from the two groups. All right, we have the group on stage right. Have you got a spokesperson? We have a spokesperson for this group here? Are you going to do it, Glenn? Why don't you come on up with the microphone? I'm going to take notes live.
Okay. So, the first question, what information do you need immediately? There was a need for the exact location of the incident and what is it? Speaking to someone who was actually doing this live, it wasn't that easy because there was a lot of different stuff going on. One of the big ones is time frame, the duration. How long is it going to be closed? That'll really drive how far out you go. One of the big questions is who's on scene and who's available? And what are the alternate routes? And are they underwater? Which I think they were early on.
Okay.
And who do you need to notify? So, we have on the list UDOT leadership. We need to make contact with Arizona and Nevada. We decided Wyoming would probably be also good as well since they have a lot of traffic incoming. Ports of entry. The public needs to be notified. Media. And as it became obvious this was going to be an extended duration incident, do we need to start talking with emergency relief folks like Red Cross? Who are we going to contact about where do we put folks who are not able to get to Nevada from Utah side? And on the information, how do information needs change? I think we really felt the need to be very consistent about what kind of detour routes we were providing. We know this from weather events. If you give two different answers, people choose the one they like the best. Or do something else entirely because there's no consistency. One of the things we suggested was starting to maybe having some contact with service providers like gas stations. A lot of gas stations have the ability to put promo videos up internal to their things. Is there any possibility that we could get something on there? One of the other needs that was identified was the need to get some type of video or visual out to the public so that they understand what's going on. And then tools. So, communications lists. Who do we contact where? Make certain that we have a good idea of who needs to be contacted and how to do it. I think a single point of contact with the media would be very good, or some type of coordinated response so that they're getting the same information from Nevada that they're getting from Utah, that they're getting from Arizona. Possibility of some pre-planned detour routes. And then potentially some type of partnership with service providers along the route, like gas stations, convenience stores, hotels, so that we've got some type of maybe way to, if we're establishing a detour route, to get out to them, hey, you're about to be inundated. So, cool.
Cool, thank you. So I know that Utah was heavily involved with sort of managing things as a result of this incident. Do you have already some pre-planned routes, some defined alternate routes for I-15? Yes, no?
More that they've been buried for years that was actually, I think, initiated by Carlos.
Okay.
And our traffic engineer had it tucked away in his area. He's pulled that out after whole things were managed. Not this last incident. This has been several incidents
Right.
ago. But there's actually pre-planned routes that have a lot of different stuff.
Okay. And any updates happening to that as a result of?
That's the good question.
Uh-huh.
Right? And this new Apple thing has brought a lot of other questions to the forefront so
Okay.
far as major.
Good. Cool. Did anybody on this side learn something new from talking about this that might have happened or you didn't realize was happening? No? Yeah?
Yeah, I'm actually for UDOT, so I thought this whole thing was very fascinating and just how things are coordinated and when something like this happens, all the things that really play into it. And so I thought it was really fascinating too of just, when you have a major closure on I-15 where the alternative routes are not going to be as great for freight and for different things, and how you have to alert different groups of people to different things. So I thought it was really, so I learned a lot.
Good. Good. All right, this group over here, who's your spokesperson? Excellent.
So Glenn covered a lot of the stuff that we had talked about. But on immediate information, one of the things that we threw in there, I don't know if you mentioned this, was it's probably important for us to know upcoming weather conditions and maybe localized weather conditions. We think that we immediately need to have some type of contact information for truck dispatches and to be able to communicate directly to freight dispatchers. He mentioned duration, estimated time. We also thought it was important to have to be able to to have an idea of when the next update time will be. In other words, a scheduled communication time when people will be able to get their updates. Talked a little bit about supplemental information that might be helpful as we take a look at managing or shifting resources. So are we dealing with an event that is requiring them to use a lot of their emergency sources and might need a shift, from neighboring areas in our resources. So far as who we need to notify, maintenance folks would be interested to know. Again, this is a resource issue, both local and contractors. And I know one of the beauties of Nevada's situation, having dealt with this, was their ability to mobilize a contractor. Really helped them to get that eastbound open, and that helped them to manage the other issues they had. Other notification, port of entries, you mentioned that, truck stops, I think we got that. We talked a lot about needing to keep databases, different types. There's ITS, the dispatchers, the communication means that a lot of these truckers are using. There's regulation on some of their cell phone use, whether it's corporate or otherwise, and especially these guys that are going from state to state, where regulations change from state to state. So some of them have protocols, and typically they'll use some of their dash maps and their CB radios and stuff, especially during a local event, to communicate. So the ability to tap into their network of communication. Neighboring states, we need to cast a very wide net, this says. Help me out with this, folks, if I'm losing anything. How the information needs to change as it extends. We think it's important to know really what the structure or the AADT is for alternate routes and whether they can handle an extended traffic closure. Coordination with news media, continuing, and then just broadcasting what those primary sources are over and over again so people get channeled to the right ones. And you might have to help me with this one, Lisa, because my glasses aren't on. We did talk about the tools that we would need for an extended incident. We'd probably want to know how a specific route fits into our long-range plan, so that as we're positioning our projects and so forth, we can use that. Corridor coalitions that already exist, we should probably be tapping into those, like the I-80 winter one and some of the local ones we have, for instance, down in our region. And probably just have a get-together at least annually to make sure that everybody knows everyone. A basic protocol for communication would be helpful. One of the examples we used, a real-life situation, was Twitter, for instance. We had St. George City tweeting that you could go through a state park to get past the closure, but Nevada hadn't officially said that, nor the Highway Patrol there. And so as questions came into my office, the media would hit me up and I'd say, well, that's not an official route that we're aware of yet from the Nevada DOT. And then we talked a little bit about the follow-up. I think it's probably important to have an after-action plan. For instance, being able to take these things to your different teams that are either planning or have upcoming projects so that they understand the MOT challenges if something goes wrong, or so that they're able to coordinate their assets.
Thank you. Was there an after-action review in Utah after Moapa?
There were a couple of multi-agency after-action meetings, but the people that attended those may not have been the operations people that were actually boots on the ground. So the way that information kind of filtered in during the event and after was possibly a little bit of a challenge.
All right. Obviously, this posed a lot of challenges for trucks. I-15 is a pretty heavy freight corridor. Getting the word out, not just among the 4 states, but elsewhere, was going to be pretty critical. Dan, I don't know if you want to share on some of the trucking information and some of the feedback you got.
Well, what we've talked about here in the two groups today are more of your tactical responses and plans and actions for dealing with something like this. Now, from the trucking industry, I'm going to talk from a more strategic point of view. If I ask the question, what does Chicago, Des Moines, Iowa, Omaha, and Barstow have to do with this? It had a lot to do with it, because those were the decision points where trucks had to decide if they were going to continue on the I-80, I-15 corridor that I talked about earlier, or go down through Oklahoma City and I-40 across northern Arizona. Ideally, trucks would know about it in Chicago to make that decision. If they didn't get it there, they would need to get it before at either Des Moines to get I-35 or at Omaha to get I-29 to Kansas City, and then head down to Oklahoma City that way. Coming the other direction, Barstow's your last real point you can make a decision. Now, you can always go to Vegas and go back down over Hoover Dam, but you've lost hours. Time is the most critical problem for long-distance highway freight, particularly with the draconian hours of service laws they have. So if you add 6 hours, for example, to a load of California lettuce, you have shortened the shelf life of that product. This happened in September when we are at our peak for truck traffic along that corridor. So it had a tremendous impact. So realize that while, yeah, we need to let Wyoming know, we need to work out a way to get the word out multiple states away, because that's how the trucking industry operates. And so getting the truck company dispatchers into the immediate loop, allowing people on site to get the information out. The thing that I always worry about from my background in railroading, if you filter things through several layers of management and have headquarters spokespeople get the information out, it's old, it's usually not accurate, and it's certainly not timely. The person in maintenance on the ground needs to be the one that's making the call on this is going to be 7 hours or 3 days or whatever, and then everybody else needs to go from that. Now, it becomes even more critical if this happens at a location where 3 different states come together. It adds a layer of complexity. So that's just a thought from the big picture point of view and how the trucking industry was impacted by this. So keep that in mind. But all of your ideas were great, and they'll help in the future.
Great. Thank you. Question, yeah.
There was a good point made. A friend of mine made a really good point. Now, we look at I-15 in civilian context. What if that was a military emergency, and this is part of the national highway system, national defense highway system? Now, military, I don't think can afford 3 weeks of closure. Why not the military or the army was informed? Maybe they had a better, faster solution for this, and could have helped us to open it up faster, sooner. So that's the point was made, and I thought it makes sense. You know, this is part of the National Defense Highway System, and it's a pretty important. 3 weeks is a very long time for them to be able not to deploy their resources or whatever they have to do.
That is a very interesting point. I don't think any military, I don't think it got up to that level. Do we have anybody from Federal Highways here today? Yeah. So what happens, we talked a lot about some of the notifications. What is FHWA's role when something like this happens?
We're hoping that we're contacted by UDOT or like Dan was saying, someone, you know, immediately so we can let our partners know too. Whether it's Federal Motor Carrier or Federal Highways.
So is that a requirement?
It's not really a requirement, but we also need to report that stuff back to headquarters too.
You know, here in the West, we have a lot of natural choke points on our highway system. Where this happened is one of the worst locations anywhere in the United States because there are no viable detours. The Grand Canyon of the Colorado River makes that the way it is. And with the I-15 group, I've suggested, look, not only on I-15, but on all the western primary freight network highways, which are also the main roads for motorists and RVs, we need to identify what are the detours, if any, for if something happens on each segment of road in the geographically challenged mountains of the West. Donner Pass in California, the Columbia River Gorge, it can be a number of places. But on the other side, then we need to realize, once we've identified those detours, we need to be willing to put some money into those roads so they don't disintegrate out from underneath us like the detour around the Moapa incident did. So they're there and they're ready for us when we need it. Disasters like this are come-as-you-are events, and there is no time to really prepare for them.
Very good, thank you. Appreciate both groups' ideas. Lot focused on processes, but some of them also very focused on what kind of a tool can be developed to really help support some of those information sharing needs, notification needs, maybe the communications with the public. And that's what we're going to try to carry forward here. We're going to pass on all of the notes. I was taking notes, you couldn't really see them, but I'm going to pass those on to the I-15 Alliance. That is really sort of a higher level organization, and we're going to take some of those into the software development process for the actual solution that's going to emerge from this. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time here talking about some of the different things that we as a group looked at as we start talking about this solution. What is it? Is it an application? Is it a website? What are some of the different data requirements and needs? So I'm just going to kind of show you a few of the ideas that we looked at. This one here is what we call a central management approach. We know whatever this system is, it's going to need to get data from all the different partner agencies. Hopefully it's getting data from some private entities as well. We know it's going to need to consolidate that data in real time and then be able to push it out in real time. So this one here looks to gather data from all of the partner agencies, pull that into some sort of a central database that agencies can access, and they can enter queries and they can search for information, but it also will package information to be able to send out. That would then be able to feed both a secure website, maybe that agencies would access, as well as some sort of a public website. This is one that we were looking at a little bit before we sort of started veering away from creating a new public-facing website. Information could then be sent through email, text, through other websites, hopefully sent out to other partners, sent to maintenance, make sure it gets to traffic ops centers, make sure it gets to law enforcement, and whatever other partners would need to be involved. Okay? Another one that we looked at was, what if we had just direct links between all the different agencies? What if we had a direct link between Utah and Arizona, and between Utah and Nevada? This is a very expensive approach, and I think a lot of the states, they really didn't want other agencies tapping directly into their systems. So this one was kind of eliminated pretty quickly. Then we thought, well, maybe it's a kind of a combination of the two. We know we are going to need to be able to tap into data somehow, and we know we want something that is sort of outside of agency systems. We don't want it interfering. So we're going to look at maybe some sort of a hybrid approach. And that's what we came up with. So we're still going to leverage all of the data that UDOT collects and that the state police collect, and maybe some of the non-DOT traffic data. Maybe if anybody has some of the private sector probe data, see if that can be leveraged. Maybe there's some of the planned event data from your reporting system. So we're going to leverage a lot of that information that's already there, filter that into some sort of a central database that then can be processed and displayed and sent to a secure I-15 website. So I think the goal of this is really to establish a site that UDOT can access, UDOT can display, that other trusted partners will be able to access, but that way it's not directly interfering or integrating with agency systems. And it's something that can be sort of updated, hopefully a tool that can be used in real time when events like Moapa happen, when major weather events happen. That information could then still be provided to other key partners that are going to need to know what's happening, what's the status, who's responding, et cetera. Okay. So this is the direction that we're going to be heading as part of the software development process. So we know we want to be able to automatically pull in some of this information. Utah's TOC gets updated detector data, they get updated messaging data, they get updated weather data. We want to be able to pull in some of that real-time information, as well as pull in some of the static, what we call static information. That would be information on planned events, construction, that kind of information that doesn't change very rapidly, right? So then we also want to be able to get in some of those jurisdictional sort of pieces of information. Who are the contacts? What are some of the freight, overheight, overweight restrictions on the corridor? We want to get some of those items in here so that we can get a full picture of what the corridor looks like, okay? Some of the core system and database functions that we're going to be looking to do, we know we need to design something that's going to be capable of getting that data, processing it, generating different events, okay? Have a contact database. I think a couple of groups mentioned the need for having updated contact information. Be able to handle requests and queries. Nevada might want some different information about what's happening than Utah does. It needs to be capable of supporting different information requests, as well as process some of those very customized user inputs. Right? So we're going to be looking to do sort of the main application. I think when we had our group meeting back in Las Vegas over the spring, people wanted to be able to have some sort of an electronic event map. Show me a map that I can zoom in on. I want it to be able to have the information from Utah, from Arizona, from Nevada, from California, get that whole comprehensive picture, and be able to select what I want to view. We also heard, too, having that ability to update contact information as people either leave or change positions, as new people come on board, be able to know who's the contact, not only at the ops center, but the district offices, maybe a key law enforcement contact, public information officer. We wanted updated information. Another feature that we had talked about was the ability to be able to use this tool to have like a live chat between the different users, the different operation centers, so that, you know, Utah could ping Nevada, hey, Las Vegas, what are you implementing in there? Or we've got a big event happening, can you put a message up to warn people of delays? So be able to have that real-time chat function rather than having to make individual phone calls. So. Folks also said they want to be able to customize it. They might not want to see the whole corridor all the time. So be able to have a way to implement some individual customized user settings. So you can sort of filter it and see what you want to be able to see. Although when there is a major emergency, there may be some functions that override that so that everybody is sure to get the emergency information. So some of the other considerations, some of the other challenges, where does this system end up? I mean, while it's being developed, it's going to be stored in one place, but one of the things that the partners are going to need to talk about and agree on is where's the ultimate home for this? Is Utah going to host it going forward? Is Nevada going to host it going forward? So that's one of the things that we'll need to sort of sort through here over the next 18 months. We also want to try to see where there are going to be some different procedures, maybe that get modified. How do we integrate that into the Traffic Operations Center standard operating procedures if we have this new tool that can be used for when major events happen? Some of the different long-term maintenance. We also know, and we're expecting a few challenges when it comes to some of the data ownership. We know we're going to be getting data from a lot of different places. Some agencies are very open when it comes to sharing data about what's happening, others are not. Sometimes there's restrictions on certain types of data. So that's something we're going to be looking at over the next 2 to 3 months, is really that data acquisition. How can we be sure that we get the data that we need? Or what kinds of agreements need to be in place to facilitate that? So we heard from both groups that having that updated contact list was really important. We actually developed a low-tech contact list with all of the Traffic Operations Center, the maintenance offices, all the key contacts there along I-15. We also consolidated, so you got a list. What's UDOT's Twitter handle? What's Arizona's Twitter handle? So you could see all the different traveler information resources. So this is kind of an interim step until we get a lot of this information into a more sort of dynamic and real-time environment, but hopefully helps to address a need of who do I contact in Las Vegas? Who do I contact in Arizona? So some of our next steps, we're going to take the input that we got here today and to help inform some of the system requirements. So if you remember our graphic here, we are starting about halfway down on that left side of the V. We're going to start developing some of these requirements. This is essentially the design document for the software. So it's going to specify things like the system shall have a secure logon. The system shall display in real time video images. So whatever some of those requirements are going to be, that's essentially the design document for software. All of that is going to trace back. We're going to make sure that we've addressed all the needs that people have identified over the last year or so as we've been working on this. Some of the other key next steps, we know we need a better way to get information to freight. So that's going to be a very significant, very important task in this next phase. And also the performance monitoring. We don't know what those measures look like yet for a corridor-wide perspective, but it is something that the Alliance and the DMP are both going to be working on. And then the alternate routing strategies. We also know that there needs to be a better way to get those implemented and get them communicated, and that is a corridor-wide challenge. All right, I want to acknowledge partners again. I know if you were to ask Nevada, they really, really do value UDOT's partnership in the entire I-15 Alliance. So thanks to those who have been involved with both the Alliance and the Mobility Project. Also want to give some acknowledgement to our project team. Our partners include Cambridge Systematics, Narwhal Group, who's based here locally, and Oz Engineering. So I know we're wrapping up just a little bit early. I hope that's not a problem. One thing I do want to check, if anybody needs CEUs, please come up and see us and we'll make sure that you get a signed copy. I do want to open it up for any questions before we...
I work with the Motor Carrier Division at UDOT, and we have a route planner that we integrate with our online permitting systems. And when we purchased that, one of the requirements for the RFP was that it would have a notification ability so that those carriers with permits, like oversized, overweight, would be able to get notifications. So when I was looking at this project, I'm kind of curious where there's redundancy or the scope of what this is versus, because we are paying maintenance for this product plus map updates. And there's some pretty significant data that we have to check all the time to make sure that the ramps will adequately work. So if you had to reroute a load because of a disaster, you wouldn't want to route it onto a road that couldn't manage the bridging weights. So I just was curious if you're working with other vendors or what?
Actually, we're not yet working with other vendors, but we're trying to get a handle on what other systems are there on the corridor to see where we might have some redundancy. California might not have that same system that you do, you know, so we're going to have to kind of figure out and balance across the 4 states where this solution can address some gaps or where you might already be a little bit further ahead. So, well, I'm sure we'll be in touch.
You know, one of the challenges with truck traffic on I-15 on any of the interstates here in the West is the fact that about half of it is from large companies like CR England. They're easy to contact. They can contact their drivers anywhere. That's great. But we had there was a driver from Quebec, Canada, who goes to Cedar City with a load of chemicals once a year. Now, how do you get a hold of them? Now, you can work through the various large corporate trucking companies, through the trucking associations like Utah Trucking Association, Nevada, et cetera, to get contacts to see, do you want to be on a notification list for this? But getting the independents and the ones that just come through once or twice a year, that's where ports of entry and motor carrier divisions can play a real role. Hand out, hey, if you want to join this, contact this number, and you'll get notifications when there's something on the I-15 corridor. Not everyone will, but you'll at least you're throwing a wider net. But because you're not going to get everybody, that's why the signage and getting the word out, way out from Utah and the Mountain West is so critical.
That's good. We're going to be trying to get a good strategy together for how do you get the right freight folks involved, and what does that look like? Is it a push notification? The bigger companies, yeah, it is easier, but it's the smaller ones, we want to make sure we can capture everyone. Question?
I don't know if we discussed this earlier, but utilizing 511 for the traveling public, is that a thought of what you guys want to do too for not just weather, but other events like you talked about?
I think what we're hoping is that the information that will come out of this system and more consistent, reliable information to the DOTs will be able to update both 511 websites, Twitter. Everybody will be able to send the same message, not have those conflicting messages. So, yeah.
I know it was mentioned that I-80 East-West provides the major freight route, I guess. Is there any reason why Idaho DOT was left out of this alliance?
I think initially Idaho was not wanting to be a funding partner as part of this, but over the course of the last 6 months, I think they've contacted Nevada and Utah and said, we really want to be part of this. So I think those boundaries are going to start expanding. Yeah.
When you look at freight flow on the I-15, about 75 to 80% of the freight either terminates in Utah or goes east on mostly I-80 and to a lesser extent I-70. The numbers north of Ogden are much, much lower as far as trucks going up to Idaho, Montana, even Canada. So that's one of the reasons Idaho is a little reluctant. What is in it for us? But I think they realize that there is something in it for them now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. Please be sure you sign the sign-in sheet. If you need CEUs, please come see us up front. I really appreciate you hanging in there. I know 8 o'clock is a tough one. So thank you so much. Let me know if you have any questions. My contact information is here. Turn over to you, Kevin.
Let's give Lisa a great hand. This has been a great, important project. Appreciate her coming out here and doing this. If you have not signed the roll, please do so. The roll also is a record for CEUs if you do not want to get a paper printout or copy signed today. We do catalog those, and those are available, that if you are audited by Doppel, you can actually get the record. So you don't have to get a paper one, but if you want one, we're more than happy to fill one out for you. But again, let's thank Lisa again, and everybody else for participating. Appreciate it. Dan, your words of wisdom, appreciate it very much. Thank you.
You've got a few minutes to get to your other. Good to see you. We'll see you soon, man. Enjoy your vacation. Oh, you do? Is there another one starting at 9:30? 9:50.
I think they're going to be. They're usually